Hello and welcome to episode 91 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have two new roster confirmations in the Call of Duty League. We have a franchise relocation being confirmed, and we have some other stuff that we might talk about if we have time. But that is the chunk of our show. But before we get into any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Been off for a little bit, but good to be back and ready to get this show on the road.
Yeah, happy belated Labor Day to all of the listeners and all of the viewers of the Ego Chall Podcast, the Challers. I don't know if we can call them that, but I just did. Let's hop into it and let's talk about some Roster Mania stuff, because that has been the bulk of the information that's been coming out over the last few weeks since our last show 2 weeks ago. Minnesota and the Los Angeles Thieves both confirmed their rosters for the next CDL season. We'll start with Minnesota. This was a roster that had been reported previously, and I think we had mentioned it a few times on the podcast. Vivid, Accuracy, Lens, and Awakening will be the Minnesota Rockers CDL lineup next season. Let's get your, official thoughts now that it's been confirmed, although we have talked about it before.
Yeah, I don't think I think any differently about the team than I did previously. Although I did in their Minnesota's announcement video, I guess, they kind of broke it down, like introducing the players and based on roles, and I did find it a little interesting. Whether they were joking or not is up for debate, but it kind of makes sense with Wake's play styles for like Wake's section. Like Vivid was like, "Hey, you want to come join me in Minnesota?" And like, "Are you guys gonna let me just get a bunch of kills?" And Vivid was like, "Yeah." So I mean, that could just be a play on, a lot of people thinking Wake just plays for kills and stuff like that, but especially the way this lineup is constructed, maybe that's going to be necessary. We know Accuracy, at least in recent years, isn't exactly a massive slayer of an AR. He's more of an in-game leader, does the dirty work known as the Iceman in S&D. But it's not too often you see him dropping like a 1.5 in a respawn. Awakening, on the other hand, you've probably seen that more often out of him. And he's had his clutches in Search and Destroy. I can even remember, like one against Atlanta early last season on El Bagra, where like he pushed out of the door and got a 2-piece and a 1v2. But yeah, I just think a lot of questions with this roster in terms of what we're going to get out of Lens, just because he's an unknown quantity for a lot of people, especially us who aren't too familiar with the European Challenger scene. If he is, like Hydra Jr., which is kind of weird to say just because Hydra's so young himself. But if he is anywhere able to replicate the success we've seen from Hydra, especially in the past season, that's a great find out of Minnesota. But I've liked Vivid, so I think the sub duo has some potential there. And I think Awakening's a talented player, so maybe playing under someone like Accuracy can make him more of a well-rounded player and, lead to some success in other regards than just dropping huge KD numbers. So we'll have to see how everything plays out for the squad. Again, I think it's tough to rate them too highly at this point, just again because Lens is pretty much an unknown, not in a good or bad way, just in the sense of I in particular don't know much about him. So I will be interested to see what he's capable of when he officially makes his debut. But until then, we're gonna have to just wait and see what this squad's capable of.
Yeah, certainly. I find it interesting, and this is just a point with Vivid and Awakening, that it's interesting to see which players kind of gravitate toward each other consistently. Like we have like these longtime teammates If you think about it, like the Optic Dynasty, like the players that were together for several years, but like these two players, Vivid and Awakening, have been on now 3 separate teams together. Florida, then Boston last season, and now in Minnesota. So like they must really like playing with each other and like being on the same team and everything. And of course we have Accuracy returning to Minnesota, which is nice to see when a player is able to go back to a team that they did have success with previously. And Lens is, like you said, an unknown. There's there are good challengers players, and he certainly had a really good team results season in challengers with Abuza, Brezzy, and Cobra. So like that's really good, and I love that he's actually getting the opportunity to kind of show it in the CDL and be able to play at the next level after having a lot of success in challengers. I think that's the natural progression that all players should go through, and it hasn't been necessarily the case for some of the other players that have had success in challengers. They don't always get the opportunity or much of an opportunity, so it's good to see that Linz is getting a starting role at the beginning of a season with a team, and hopefully we'll be able to get a good chance and a good opportunity heading into the next season. Like you said, though, I really can't give them I can't put them very high in my tier rankings or anything for the CDL at the moment, because a lot of these rosters that have been confirmed have been very stacked, and I just don't see this one at the present time being a big contender in the CDL with how good some of those other rosters look to be. Let's move on to the LA Thieves one, which is another interesting roster, which was also previously reported. The Los Angeles Thieves, after 2 seasons after winning the World Championship in 2022, having a really disappointing end to the season in 2023. And then there was that podcast with Nadeshot and some of the 100 Thieves business guys talking about their approach to LA Thieves, and considering how much money they had lost. I think it was $2.5 million when they won the World Championship in 2022. That they were looking to kind of not lose that much money essentially, and that they were going to have to rebuild after having a championship contending roster. And I don't think this is like this is not what I would consider a rebuild roster, because there's so much talent for LAT. The roster that they confirmed is Afro, Joe Deceives, Cammy, and Ghosty, which, if you think about it, going into last season, Afro and Cammy were a part of that Minnesota team that I was very high on. There were a lot of other people that thought they could do very well in the CDL. It didn't work out that way. Afro ended up getting benched, and it just kind of fell apart for Minnesota, despite them ending up making champs. Joe Deceives was one of the more anticipated rookies for last year with the LA Gorillas, so kind of staying in the LA city. But LAG, just like their entire season, kind of went out the window pretty early on with all of the behind the scenes stuff, with the organizational issues. And Joe Deceives was really never in a really competitive, like, high stakes series, I would imagine, just from they were pretty much out of contention from being in champs pretty early on, unless they made a run, and they just never made that run, which was disappointing. And then there's Ghosty, who was one of the best rookies of the season last year, had a major impact on Optic Texas, and got them to a point where they look like world championship contenders until the last month of the season, and then everything fell apart for them, and he found himself on the outs with Optic and not a part of that roster for this coming season. What are your thoughts on this LAT roster now that it's been confirmed?
Yeah, I think it is somewhat worthwhile to compare at least the duo of Vivid and Awakening to Afro and Cammy, in the sense of, you mentioned Vivid and Awakening playing together for multiple seasons in the past. Afro and Cammy not quite as many previous experiences together as those two, but they did play together last year, and in similar situations, one of the two players who were playing together last year did get benched. Yet they're still trying to reunite again for the upcoming season. So that is a little interesting. I think it is a little weird to consider this a rebuild. Excuse me. But in a lot of ways, I do think it is, pretty similar to a rebuild in the sense that it might not be fresh faces and rookies, but Joe DeCease, this will be his first full season in the CDL. Same with Ghosty. They were both mid-season additions. Joe DeCease was earlier than Ghosty, but this will be their first full seasons in the league. And even Afro, I think he was a late addition in Black Ops Cold War, so this would be his second full season. And even then, he didn't play a full season last year because he got benched. So you can make the case that 3 of these 4 players haven't had a full CDL season, unless you could add end of Cold War too. Actually, no, that doesn't make sense because Afro would have played all of Vanguard, right? So scrap that. But anyway,
not a lot of experience, regardless.
Yes, and I think Cammy is in a really make or break situation for him. There's been a lot of conversations, especially going back to Cold War when he was like a top 5 MVP candidate of can he get back to that form, and we really haven't seen that the last couple of years. And this is an opportunity for him to almost, in a sense, be the leader of the team. He's the most veteran player, but it will be interesting to see how he works with Ghosty, because from everything we have heard about Ghosty, it did kind of seem like he took a at least somewhat of a leadership or vocal role in the Optic squad last year. So I think there's a lot of talent on this team. Afro and Joe DeCease is an interesting sub duo on paper. They both have a lot of potential, and it could be it could work out really well. I'm most excited to see how Ghosty does in year 2. I think especially that Optic and nade shot connection. It would be really cool. Maybe just from a narrative standpoint, but if Ghosty has a strong year this year and then basically becomes the face of LA Thieves as another former Optic player joining LAT, and then building around him for years to come, that could be an interesting storyline, but obviously that's getting a little ahead of ourselves. But I do like Ghosty, and I think that there's definitely potential there for that to happen, but it's going to come down to the success of this team. And then again, who knows, just in terms of what we've heard about the business of LAT, if they're able to, actually break even based on what they're spending or anything like that. Maybe this is a team that they continue to keep some of these players even if they don't have the success, because although LAT fans are going to be looking for championships as they've grown accustomed to over the last couple of years, that might not necessarily be the number one goal for the organization, which is weird to say because for the most part, organizations do want to win, but at the end of the day, LAT has made it explicitly clear that the financial well-being of the organization may take precedent over winning a championship. I think John Robinson literally said in that video, like if he knew it was going to cost $2.5 million or whatever to win the world championship, would he do it again? He would want to, but I can't remember how he phrased it now. But
he said it was guaranteed, essentially.
Yeah, and he was like, but you can't do that year after year after year. So yeah, I mean, that's why it'll be interesting to see it. It could be that I think this is a point that I raised when we first heard that news about the financial situation in the past for LAT, and if I didn't, I guess I'm not repeating myself, but it could be a culture shock for LA Thieves fans who come from the green wall mindset of win or bust, and if this team doesn't win a championship this year, I probably wouldn't be super surprised. But it'll come down to, how are the fans able to handle that just because, again, coming off back-to-back championships and a world championship in Vanguard, and they had the major championship last year, so 3 championships in the last 2 years. You get that taste of victory and you don't really want to let it go. So will be interesting to see how that all plays out. I do think this squad has some potential. I would like to, once we have all of the rosters, I would like to try and do some sort of tier/power ranking, but I think it's pretty clear cut, and we've talked about it on multiple episodes, that like the top 4 seems pretty obvious in terms of, in no particular order: Optic, Atlanta, Toronto, and New York. Then there's going to be the middle of the pack after that, which might be a mismatch of some of these teams mentioned today, like Minnesota and LAT. And then probably there's a couple teams that haven't been announced yet. They by default might just be in the back third of the
longer
rankings.
You wait, the fewer their players are. We dealt with it in Boston with the first season, even though that ended up working out well for them, but it could always happen again.
So, yeah, I think if I had to rate both of these 2 teams we've talked about now, Minnesota and LAT, they're probably in that 5 to 8 range right now, just without even thinking about it too much, and especially taking into account those 4 other teams being in that upper echelon. But, it's tough to do that now anyways, just because we don't know the game and don't know what it's going to be like. But, all things considered, what we do know and the names on paper, that's where my head's at with this squad right now.
Too, you kind of alluded to, and you mentioned how these players have relatively little experience, like at the CDL level. Like Ghosty and Joe Thieves haven't even played a full CDL season. Afro has played probably two total, maybe 2.5 total seasons in the CDL. But now this would be with his 3rd team. And when he was with London, they, if I remember correctly, weren't that competitive, or I can't remember if like his first season was the season that they did really well, or if that was the season before that. But either way, like he hasn't had a lot of success as a team. And then there's Cammy, who has been near the top. Like you mentioned, he was an MVP candidate in 2021, I believe that was. I believe that's 2021. But he didn't have a good season last year, and the team didn't have a good season. So to kind of sum it all up, it is kind of a rebuild for LAT, where there's kind of not starting from zero, because that would be kind of insulting to this roster, but they're rebuilding, taking away the championship credentials and taking in these very talented players who they believe can grow and be great together, but haven't had that success, and certainly haven't had it together. And then these players are rebuilding essentially because they all ended the season on a bad note. Afro and Cammy being on Minnesota, Afro not even playing at the end of the year, Joe Thieves being on one of the worst, if not the worst team in the league last year, and then Ghosty having the high of being so good so late into the season, and then to for it to all kind of fall out at the end of the year. So kind of a rebuild for everybody involved in this situation, and I'm really intrigued to see how it ends up going for LAT. And I do think we should, once the rosters have been confirmed, kind of look at it and rank them individually, see if maybe there is a team in that what we believe to be outside that top 4, maybe they look better once everything is kind of confirmed and set in stone. This is not a roster mania thing, but we should mention it because it is kind of following a trend that we have every offseason. We had earlier in the offseason the Miami Heretics pop up to replace the Florida Mutineers, and now we have no more European teams in the CDL. At the beginning of the CDL, of course, we had the London Royal Ravens and we had the Paris Legion. We've had one European event in 4 years or whatever it was. Granted, there was a pandemic involved in there, but still one European event. And after the Legion moved from Paris to Las Vegas before the last season, we only had one European team in the CDL, and now we have 0 European teams in the CDL, as the London Royal Ravens have become the Carolina Royal Ravens, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and will be representing the Carolinas, like the Carolina Panthers try to do, even though they are also based out of Charlotte. I think we might have, like, we've hinted at it a lot. Like, we've definitely dropped the hints of like, oh, like, we don't even know if we'll have a European team, or, you know, we don't even know what London will be or the Royal Ravens will be, because there was a report, I don't even know when that was, but it was by the Sports Business Journal, and they had mentioned that the Royal Ravens were looking into moving their headquarters to Charlotte and like relocating, but we both said at the time, like, what does that even mean? Because they're obviously already in America, like they were based out of the United States, because no CDL team is really based out of anything but the United States, except the Ultra, who are in Toronto. So but it is official now. The Royal Ravens are officially the Carolina Royal Ravens. No roster was confirmed as a part of this announcement. But your thoughts now that we officially have confirmation that Europe has been abolished from the CDL and it's all about America and Toronto?
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument now that even in previous years with London, they did have a couple like all European rosters, but they slowly had situations due to like visa issues and stuff where there was an American or North American player in there. But you can make the argument now that, you know, outside of Toronto, LAT is the most European team because they got Afro and Cammy. But I think Toronto has historically, even though Toronto is in Canada, since the inception of the CDL, they've had, you know, the most success of European players, and they've had a plethora of European players, and even, you know, a full European roster actually. Yeah, Insight, Cammy, Banson, Kleenex. So yeah, and I mean they had Marky B and Flux and even Joe as a coach, I believe. So like they definitely now are like the quote unquote European organization in my mind. But yeah, I think that's just the big thing right now is, you know, we went from the CWL, the Call of Duty World League, right, which had like the division of you know, the North American and the European and even the Aussie leagues, to now we're in the CDL, and all of the 11 of the teams are in the United States and one is in Canada. Just pretty crazy to be in this position after, you know, what, now this is going to be the this will be the 5th season. And we've had a lot of rebrands, but, you know, this is back-to-back years now where we had Paris move to Vegas and now London going to the Carolinas. So it is interesting. Definitely something that a lot of European fans who have definitely been vocal about wanting European events, it's definitely something that they are going to be upset about. And, you know, it does beg the question of when will the next time be that we see an event in London, or just, you know, Europe in general. But I know that has been something that a lot of people have asked. So we'll have to see what happens in that regard. But, you know, speaking about this new team, just, you know, I guess same franchise, just different location, no roster yet. But I do think they have a lot of different directions they could go in, and there are a lot of valuable players who haven't really been linked to any reported rosters or anything like that. Names that immediately jump out to me are Clay, Attach, Temp. Those are the big ones I was thinking about. I guess Standy is up there too.
A lot of challengers players, every challenger player,
yeah,
pretty much.
And I think that's, you know, at this point now we're sitting in September. Game comes out in what is it?
November.
It's November 10th, so we're 2 months from the launch of the game. at this point, if some of these late standing rosters or organizations just decided to wait till the game drop to get a roster, like I wouldn't be necessarily mad at them or anything like that. I think that might be a smart business decision, especially if they're going for like, trying to find the diamond in the rough sort of thing. Looking at last year, for example, even LAG, they had their main roster with like Varsity Spart, Neptune, and Hook, and then the LAG Academy team, which was Diamond Con was the only one who didn't get called up. So it was Diamond Con, Assault, Exceed, and Joe Deceives. The Academy team was doing better than the LAG team, and then they swapped them in, basically just keeping Varsities instead of Diamond Con. And even that squad, although they did well in the Challenger scene, didn't obviously have the desired results in the CDL. So, it's definitely a tricky spot to be in for these organizations that don't have squads yet, but there is a lot of directions they can go, and there are some valuable, veterans and well-known players that you could decide to build a squad around. So I'm definitely waiting to see what these last few squads do. Just to finish out my thought that I kind of cut myself off on, the only teams that we don't have rosters for now are, we don't have confirmed rosters for the Ravens, Legion, the Gorillas, and the Surge. We do have a report on a potential roster for Seattle. So if that does come to fruition, then 3 teams in Carolina, Vegas, and LAG do not have rosters yet. So basically 12 spots, not counting sub spots. So 12 starting spots still technically up for grabs at minimum.
And who knows what's going to happen with LAG, because the guard stuff that happened in Valorant, and obviously there were massive layoffs earlier in the year for the organization. That just, it seems so weird that we haven't heard anything about it in like 5-6 months or whatever. So it's a very weird situation we have going on there. But to talk about the Royal Ravens, I mean, I've made my my position really clear about city-based franchising, like especially in the CDL. Now that we've kind of seen it for the past 4 seasons and going into a 5th, it's stupid. It's worthless. Like, it doesn't actually do anything for most of these teams. I'm sure in a way, like a Minnesota RØKKR, they are very in touch with, like, they did home series in Minnesota and Wisconsin. They're the only Midwestern team, so they kind of get like free reign over the Midwest in a way. So that's good for them. And I'm sure being in LA is very nice for LAT, because that's kind of like their identity, is they're all based in LA for 100 Thieves and all of that. And I'm sure a few other teams, like we talked about when the Heretics signed and they announced their roster, it's on an all Spanish roster. Miami is one of like the most bilingual cities in America. A lot of Spanish speaking people in Miami, so that kind of makes sense. But at the same time, it would be a lot cooler if we had a team in Madrid or Barcelona, and those players that are from Spain, they have Spanish coaches, they are sponsored or signed by a Spanish organization, that they could just be with a Spanish organization. That would make more sense to me, and live in Spain and be able to compete or kind of represent their country or their cities more accurately. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of the city-based stuff, but it especially sucks to lose London of all cities, because there was a report that came out, I think like a day or two after this this news or the announcement happened, but it was a study done by a UK organization that showed that Call of Duty is the most popular esport in the United Kingdom, and that 25% of people who follow esports in the UK watch Call of Duty, beating out CS:GO, which was in second, which had 23%. And I think that is like, and it's obvious if you just look at like the players that are in the CDL or that were previously in the CWL. Like, there's a lot of English players in the CDL compared to like how small of a country it is compared to the United States. Like, there are a lot of English players, or a lot of like Irish or Northern Irish players, some Scottish players. I think Cammy is Scottish. So like there are a lot of players from like the UK and the surrounding area in the Call of Duty League that it wouldn't make sense if it weren't that Call of Duty is so popular in the UK. And we even see it with the World Series of Warzone. Where are they having the World Series of Warzone global final? They're having it in London, not in LA, not in New York or Chicago. They're having it in London, England, which kind of shows you that like it is a global esport. Like the places that Call of Duty should be focusing the most on: the United States, Canada, England, and Australia. If they want to expand outside of that, and I think to a lesser extent, Spain is probably the only one, like, because those are the regions or the countries that have consistently showed support for Call of Duty. And I should mention France as well. I shouldn't exclude the French like that. But those countries and regions have done so well with supporting Call of Duty and kind of being a pipeline to the CDL or the CWL, or before then the MLG Pro League, or whatever iteration of this you want to go down. We have a lot of English players. The pipeline to Australia and New Zealand is very interesting. Like we used to have Mind Freak and Tainted Minds and all like Chiefs and all these other Renegades for a little bit, I think, not in the CDL, but before then. So it's kind of, it sucks that we don't have any representation outside of now Toronto and the United States, which Toronto is like, a hop and a skip away from the United States. Like it's very accessible to Americans. And it sucks that we're in this place where we've kind of excluded ourselves. Like before the CDL, it wasn't perfect by any means, but it feels like we're just getting like, we're shrinking a little bit in terms of the reach of Call of Duty. Whereas we see in other esports, like the LCS, like and of course this is different because in League, like the LCS is kind of like crap compared to what the LPL and LCK are, but they like go and get like very good talent from other regions and bring them to America, and the LPL and LCK are still able to sustain themselves and be able to be competitive and even better than the LCK or LEC, despite these other regions going into their regions and pulling out some of the best talent. Whereas that's not the case for Call of Duty. Like the American organizations take what they can from Europe or take what they can from Australia, and there's nothing that's ever being put back into those regions. They're just kind of stuck there and probably dying in a way. Like I don't know what the exact measurement would be to measure the UK or the European like COD community or the Australian or New Zealand COD community, but I would imagine that it's dying because there's no support being given to these regions. And this is just kind of the London Royal Ravens thing is kind of just like another step in that direction of like they're moving away from these like regional identities and more toward just like, well, all these players are going to be in America. And I just don't think that works very well. I don't know if you had anything to add on that, but I just kind of ramble for a little bit, but it's just annoying that we deal with this all the time.
No, yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that is kind of an overarching topic that we've talked about numerous times on the podcast, and as a potential reason for this happening as well as a potential solution, is expansion, right? If at least within these 5 years 4 teams had been added, we could have had more franchises added, potentially even, we talked about it at that time, like before Heretics went to Miami, like having a Spanish CDL team or even another French team with Paris, leaving now. But if we talked about it with Paris, like, potentially struggle, or not potentially, but when they did struggle, how they could have taken an approach to like, build around someone like Hydra at that time, all those years ago, or even someone like Brezzy, who is probably before Hydra, like the most notable French player in terms of like actually seeing success in the CWL. There's a guy like I can't think of his name. Whalers
Yeah.
is the guy I'm thinking
He's
of.
a Valorant pro now.
Yeah, and was Gotaga French?
Yeah, Gotaga is like the French guy. He's like French scump.
Yeah, he's like French Nate John is who what I was thinking of. But anyway, yeah, I mean, not relocation, sorry, expansion could have been an opportunity for not only other organizations to enter regions outside of NA, but it also could have given those teams, if they were, and an opportunity to pull from like that more local player base, maybe even potentially grow that player base in that region. Because let's just sticking with Paris, for example, if Paris went with like a full French roster, maybe that gets more young French players interested in trying to pursue a CDL career. It grows that scene a little bit more, makes it more competitive, and then that could create a mini pipeline for a French CDL team for years to come. That's probably a bit of a fantasy at this point, but that's just where we're at. And I think with no expansion and in a sense going in the opposite direction of expansion, at least in the global scale, in terms of we had these presences outside of NA, now that's shrinking. That does raise some concerns in terms of these other player bases outside of the U.S. and the opportunities they'll be given. But we are seeing, players like Hydra, and even this year, someone like Linz, who we don't know a lot about because he's in that European Challenger scene. He's still finding a way to get an opportunity in the CDL. So it's not like it's a total shutdown, and there's just no European players finding their way in. But it's definitely not as many opportunities as there could have been if we were to ever have expansion, and in particular expansion to some of these other European areas.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say is I don't think that the League of Legends or Valorant system is perfect by any means, but the idea of having these regions be separate and distinct seems like the best solution for like franchising or partner leagues or whatever. Having like an American league, or having a European league and an Australian league and a Latin American league, I think that is by far the best option for esports in general, because it's just not realistic to think that the best players in the world just come to America. Like, it's not the NBA, it's not the NFL, it's not MLB, it's not the NHL. Like, there just needs to be borders for these leagues. And if we had something like that, if we had what was essentially in place before the CDL, but the Call of Duty World League, where you had the best teams in America, say they have a little league or a competition, you have the best teams in Europe, the best teams in Australia, and the best teams in Latin America, and then they do what essentially happens in soccer, where they have these domestic leagues, these national leagues. Whoever wins that, or whoever gets a high placing, can get put into the Champions League, which is like the best competition. This is who is the best team in Europe, essentially. If we had something like that, and have an event on the level of Worlds and League of Legends, or MSI and League of Legends, or what we just saw with the Valorant World Championship, I think that would be the best case scenario. And of course, that means we have to kind of reverse course to what we've been doing the last few years, because it's been more in the opposite direction. Like you were saying, like where it's constricting, we're just looking, okay, like these players and teams are based in America, and that's really all that matters. And yes, we'll take some of the very talented European players, or someone like Pred, who pops up in the Australian league or Australian scene. We'll take those players, but I think it's just not sustainable in the long run. So hopefully something can change, and hopefully one day we can look back and be like, you remember when we didn't have any European teams in the top level of Call of Duty, or we didn't have any teams outside of North America? I think that would be cool if we could look back and say, wow, we were really stupid then, and now we have all these European teams and Australian teams that we can kind of build up, and it's really a global esport, which is really what we should be striving for at the end of the day. I think that about does it for the Carolina stuff. Let's talk real quick about this report from Jacob Hale, who reported on September 5th, so last Tuesday, He said sources, Call of Duty League may have earmarked where they want the first event of the season to be. CDL Major 1, DreamHack Atlanta 2023, which is December 15th through the 17th, which that date lines up almost perfectly with what we had last year or this last season. Started in December, but that event was a CDL run event in Raleigh, North Carolina, which was separate, just a CDL event. So the CDL going to DreamHack, if this report does end up being true, and being a part of DreamHack Atlanta would be very interesting, and it would seem to indicate that the CDL is changing their mentality about this, because they've been so separate from all of the other esport events that have been happening the last several years. To be a part of DreamHack, which is a big gaming event that CSGO has been a part of, I believe Halo has been a part of it before. This would be kind of a big thing. What do you think about this report about DreamHack Atlanta?
Yeah, I'm not as fussed about whether it's a DreamHack event or whatnot. I mean, if it's in Atlanta, Atlanta FA is one of the most successful teams in the CDL. The location makes sense. I'm not overly concerned about that either way. What I'm interested in is the second part, where he clarified. I'm trying to find it here because it's not showing up.
The first event might not be a major, but it is being targeted as a location for the first event of the season. Possible kickoff tournament before the league starts? ?
That's what I'm interested in, because that wouldn't be the same as what happened last year. So looking at it, we had the CDL Major 1 in Raleigh last year was December 14th to the 18th. They had the online qualifiers before that. I think it was only 2 weeks for it was only 2 weeks for the first. So that was December 2nd to the 14th. So there wasn't an actual kickoff event in 2023. There was the kickoff event in 2022. However, and that, I guess I'll just pull it up because I have COD PD here. So the kickoff event in 2022 was in January 21 to 23. So if this first event in DreamHack isn't a major, it would be like a combination of the last 2 years, in the sense of the timeline would match last year's Major 1, but it wouldn't be the same, because it would be a kickoff, but the kickoff was held later to start the prior season. So it's a little weird in that term, and I think it would be kind of a step in the wrong direction if we had a kickoff instead of Major 1 at that time, just because I feel like the last season we were talking about how starting the season closer to the launch of the actual game, and it felt like, having that December start a month, I can't remember, maybe the game last year launched at the end of October instead of early November, I think. But it still felt closer. Well, it was 100% closer to the launch of the game than any previous CDL season. If this first event is a kickoff that doesn't really count, as opposed to Major 1, which does definitely count for the season, then that's just kind of, in my eyes, a step backwards. So I would like to see, if this does come to fruition, that this first event is a major, because it would align at least with the schedule that we had last year, and kind of, it would keep us in path to have that almost early as possible launch in correlation with the launch of the game.
I agree. It would be a massive setback if it was a kickoff event, which would mean that the first major probably wouldn't be until January, and then we're back to where we started with, before we had pushed up everything, and we've already had a long off season already. Like the season ended in June. We're 3 months into the off season, or close to it, and that would be, if our first major didn't happen until January, that would be 7 months between champs and the first major, which makes no sense. This is not a physically intensive sport. This is not like football, where we're letting guys rest their bodies the entire summer. We don't need this. It's video games. I'm not saying that it should be year round or anything, but to have half the year off is not not good for anyone, really. Like, it's not good for the developers, not good for the players, not good for the teams. Like, who's getting income, and like you're not really able to kind of generate revenue as quickly or as much as you would like. I think kickoffs events kind of suck in general because like there's no point, because like preseason football, the only reason people give a crap about preseason football is just that football is back. Like, that's cool. It's on TV, but like the games don't matter. And I think the same thing for kickoff events in COD. It was cool the first CDL season to see it in Minnesota, to be like, oh, look at this. Like, and I believe those matches actually mattered a little bit. So I think there are points involved, but like either way, it was just kind of like the spectacle of like, this is what the CDL is. And then of course COVID happened, and then it was like, it died immediately. But I think the real kickoff event would be just holding a tournament, like an exhibition tournament, the weekend of MW3's launch, just kind of as like a promotional thing. Like, oh, look, like we have the best Call of Duty players in the world, and they're just kind of competing in these exhibition matches that don't really matter. But hey, you guys should watch the CDL when it actually starts next month on YouTube or Twitch or whatever. That was something that we forgot about the notes, that it's Hex said it's going to be on YouTube, regardless of what he wants. So that would be awful, and we've already said our 2 cents about that. But I think if you're going to do a kickoff event, do it in LA or something where they're just all kind of, it's just like a local LAN event experience where they're just trying to test out the game. They're playing competitive matches. If things go wrong, it's not the end of the world, because they're just kind of testing it out, just kind of playing for fun, and to promote the game being released and that the CDL is coming back for a 5th season. I really, really hope that this isn't a kickoff event in December. But I do think it would be cool if the CDL incorporated more of its events in other gaming events, like being a part of DreamHack, or if they wanted to team up with Halo, now that Microsoft is buying Activision Blizzard. Like, those things don't have to be so distinct with each other. Like, you could have like dual tournaments again, where you have one set of the stage is Halo, one set of the stage is Call of Duty, like back in the MLG days. They could just bring back MLG because they own that too. So we could just have all of these different things, and I think being incorporating those into other gaming scenes would be helpful in the long run for the CDO. Anything else you have before we move on? So let's talk about the guard stuff. And we'll just briefly mention this and get out of here. So if you listened, was that 2 or 3 weeks ago that we did that podcast? It was probably 2 weeks ago. And we talked about the Guard, which is the parent organization of the LA Guerrillas. And we talked about it earlier in the show, or mentioned it, how they had a bunch of layoffs earlier in the year, and everything seemed to be kind of falling apart. But then their Valorant team, the Guards Valorant team, ended up qualifying for the Valorant Champions Tour Americas League, which is, kind of like the LCS equivalent in Valorant, being one of the best American teams, being a part of, like, as lucrative as you can get in the scene, being a part of a lucrative league. And then they were kind of excluded from that league because the Guard had not submitted paperwork or had not responded to Riot's request for information. And Riot excluded that team, the roster, from being a part of it in any case or any scenario, because they don't want the teams to be the team slots to be sold. They want reputable and, I guess, financially like solvent teams to be a part of the league. That's a very novel concept. But things have changed since then. We had our little conversation about that 2 weeks ago. We both said how it's really stupid how these players are getting screwed over for nothing that they could do about it. Like, they couldn't make the Guard do anything different in that situation. And things have changed. It seems that Riot has said that the players will not be impacted by this decision, or the coach, and they can stick together and find a new organization and play under that organization for the next season of the Americas League. I don't know if you had any thoughts or any comments on this, but we did have that conversation a few weeks ago, and I'm glad that it seems to be resolved in a logical fashion, and these players not be completely screwed over for something that they had no hand in.
Yeah, no, I mean, the only reason I really wanted to bring it up again is because, it was essentially your point when we were talking about it, that you felt like the spot should go to the players, and at the end of the day, it seems like Riot, took a step back and, who knows, maybe they listen to the Ego Chall podcast and they're like, damn, Preston really knows what he's talking about. We should listen to this guy.
Wish the CDL did that.
But jokes aside, yeah, I think it's good. It will be interesting to see how it plays out for these players. I think the report is that G2 is potentially interested in acquiring the spot and entering the VCT by signing these former The Guard players, which is kind of interesting in a CDL parallel because there's a report of G2 potentially merging with Minnesota. So, there's been drama around G2 over the last year with the whole Carlos and Andrew Tate situation. But if potentially G2 does end up moving into two of the bigger franchise leagues, especially for FPSs, that's a sign of good things from the organization from a business standpoint, at least in that regard, in terms of rebounding from the Carlos fiasco. But yeah, I think obviously this isn't a Valorant podcast, but we did talk about it, at length. So I thought it was important to give an update to our listeners who might not have seen the update themselves. And I do think at the end of the day, for our CDL audience, this still is my position at the time, and my position still right now is that this is the Guard situation in Valorant is a massive red flag for LAG and what the future might look like for that organization. As we said earlier in the show, they still don't have a roster. We still haven't really heard an update from them if they're potentially staying in the league, if they're selling, who really knows. But that's what my biggest takeaway is in terms of a CDL impact for this Valorant situation.
Yeah, it's really stupid because not what you're saying, but LAG in general, because they decided to invest, I would imagine, quite a bit of money last year this time when they signed Arstes and Spart to 3-year contracts. They signed away Marky B from Toronto, where he had been like the head coach and GM for 3 years, and they decided to bring him to LAG to kind of rebuild their organization. And then a year later, they're just like, yeah, fire everyone except the players the players and coaches that are currently on staff, and like don't say anything about it. Like, that's the most ridiculous thing in the world, to kind of just like fire. They've fired dozens of people, I think, in the spring, and never said anything about it. Like, I don't think there was one statement or one comment about it. And then they just kept funding their Valorant team. That ended up working out well. Then there was a calamity, and they had to, everybody had to pretty much complain to Riot how screwed up the situation is, and that the players shouldn't be punished for the Guard being incompetent. But like, it's just a really crappy situation all around. And I agree with you. It seems like a precursor to what we'll probably see with LAG, or what we could see with them, just because like there's no way that this ends neatly and like without some kind of drama. And if that report is to be true, then we're 3 months away from the next season of the CDL, less than 3 months away probably, until we started off with some kind of online matches, and we have no idea if there's going to be a 12th team in this CDL. Like, we have no idea what's going to happen with that roster, or what that slot is going to be if LAG isn't a part of it.
I mean, that was a scary situation 2 years ago now, right? When
Austin
there was like the what was it, the Washington Demon Cats or whatever?
Yeah, great branding.
And that was a result of the Chicago
Optic and MV.
NRG, like having the spot or whatever that needed to be sold. And there were rumors at that time, but I don't know if it was ever reported, but there was definitely talks of there potentially being only 11 teams, and I was like, that's just a nightmare from like a bracket building standpoint and just like,
An
you know,
image standpoint.
yeah, I mean, like go again as we just talked about like 20 minutes ago. That's the definition of reverse expansion. Um,
That's kind of like what the
even in the sense of
WNBA has done. Like, I think they're growing now, but like for a long time, it was they'd have like 15 teams, and then they go down to 8, and then they go back to up to 11, and then they'd be like at 9. And
oh
I
wow,
think that they're now like ready to expand because they're doing what the CDL is trying to do and get through all the bad crap, and then hope that this becomes more lucrative, more people watch it, and then expand once you have that money. But it would just look poorly on the league if you have 12, 12, 12, 12, okay, 11 teams now, and that
yep,
team just like completely goes bankrupt and completely leaves the scene. I think that would suck.
definitely.
So yeah, uh, I, I think it's congratulations to the Guard players or whatever organization they'll be a part of. The G2 thing would be interesting because the only reason G2 doesn't have one of those spots already is because of Carlos and Andrew Tate, because that was like the big drama was they got excluded from Riot selection because of that. So that would be kind of fortunate for them that it all worked out in this way. And yeah, I think it's hopefully it will work out well for those players. I don't really care if it works out well for Stan Kroenke or whatever. I could care less about that kind of stuff. But uh, I mentioned it, but I don't know if you saw this. But Hex, he said it on one of the Optic podcasts. He was talking with like Methods and Scump, I think, and he said that like regardless of whether like he doesn't want it to happen, but he thinks that it's like almost confirmed to happen that the CDL is going to be streaming on YouTube this coming season, and like Scump was like, "Oh crap!" Like because obviously the watch parties were a big success story for them. So I don't know if you saw that or heard any of that.
Yeah, I saw that clip. I don't remember when I saw it, but I definitely saw it, and especially Scump's reaction to it. Um, so I didn't really look into it any further, but then I did remember. So 2 days ago, Tactical Rab uploaded a video. Zuma leaks YouTube deal canceled. Sources say CDL stays on Twitch. I didn't actually watch that video, but I remember seeing it in my subscriber box. So it seems like there's a little uncertainty there as to what's going on, which makes um a little sense to me. And if the league is considering staying on Twitch or not, it seems like with the success of watch parties and stuff, it really would be a big blow if they decided to just go to YouTube. And then what would the impact be for people like Scump and Zuma who are partnered on Twitch? Would they have to like do what Nadeshot did at one point? I believe Nadeshot like had to get rid of his partnership to stream on YouTube or something like that. Um, so then it would be a question of would those big names actually do that in order to continue the watch parties, and would they hit the same levels of success viewership wise on YouTube versus Twitch? A lot of questions around that, but I think obviously Hex as an owner in the CDL, you would think he is well informed to what's going on, or at least potentially going on. So that's a little concerning. I, as a fan, I do like watching on YouTube. I missed last year, you know, as simple of a feature as it might be, just being able to rewind like 10 seconds at the end of a game just to make sure you got the final score right when you're like noting it down. Something as simple as that, I really missed that on Twitch. And Twitch, you could like clip the end of the game and then check the clip to see that, but that's just a tad more work. So first world problems there. But yeah, I think that's a big question. We're gonna have to wait to hear official news on. I would love for the CDL to stay on Twitch and YouTube, but as you've talked about in articles and on this pod before, there is some value, and in some cases, a lot of value to media rights deals. But yeah, it's that's another question we're gonna have to wait to hear the answer to, and especially if this league is potentially starting up in early December, we're gonna need an answer within the next 3 months.
Yeah, it's a situation where I understand the point of, oh, we could get this revenue from the media rights deal, even if it's paying $1 or whatever. Like that's $1 that we didn't have before. My counterpoint to that would be you are severely limiting your reach and the number of people that will watch your product, even if you cannot directly monetize them. And I understand that's a big point of contention. Is like, well, what does it matter to us if people are watching Scump stream or they're watching Zuma stream? That's not like they're not getting it. Like the CDL isn't getting anything. And it's like, well, it's kind of like you're getting exposure. And I hate this argument because like it's used in like real jobs and stuff. Like, well, we'll pay you an exposure. Well, at a certain point, like the CDL has to kind of just accept that. Like they're not gonna, like it's better to get the viewership and just have people aware of your product. That's a little more valuable in the long run than actually monetizing it to a degree that like you're actually limiting the number of people that are going to watch your product. That was my main contention with MLG.TV back in the day, was you're excluding all of these COD players and all of the COD tournaments and putting them on a site that is completely separate from the League of Legends tournaments and the League of Legends players and the CSGO players and the CSGO tournaments. They're all separate from that. So like people that are watching a CSGO stream and they're like, oh, let me browse, and they see 100,000 people on the CDL YouTube or the CDL Twitch channel. And they're like, oh, what's the CDL? I've never heard of it. They click on it. Maybe they become a fan. But when it is on a completely different site, that person's never going to get there unless it's through like social media or word of mouth. Like they're just never going to make the connection from Twitch to MLG.TV or Twitch to YouTube. And I think there's a big audience on YouTube itself, but it's still not a streaming first platform. I think anybody could see that from like all of the stuff that you love about YouTube is just YouTube. It's not anything YouTube streaming or YouTube live does. It's just the YouTube platform in general is more convenient to rewind and stuff and pause and everything like that. Whereas Twitch, it's all about live streaming. They don't really care about pausing it or rewinding at all. But you know, I agree with you on the YouTube front, as like it's a lot easier to use when you miss something and you want to go back. It's easier to do that. For me, it makes no sense for the CDL to kind of get rid of all of the Twitch viewers just for a little bit of extra money, that they're definitely not going to make a profit anyway. So what's it matter to them if they lose 1.2 million and 1.3 million? Like to me, that doesn't mean anything. And I don't think it should mean anything to all of the VC people that have kind of invested into it. Like this is a long-term thing. If it's not a long-term thing, then kill it and let everybody go back to the CWL and let's start all over again. Like, but if I just don't think it's worth it. And I disagree with Hex on a lot of stuff, and I disagree with some of the other people that support this, but they have the right idea. It's about building the community back up and building the viewership back up rather than making a quick buck with the media rights deals. So hopefully they did, you know, go back to being on Twitch and YouTube both, because that is beneficial to the league, and hopefully down the line they can sell their media rights to whoever they want and it doesn't affect the league, and they're in, you know, down the line they could be in the NFL's position. Probably not, but the NFL can do whatever. They can sell they could sell it for $1 billion and it makes complete sense to them. But yeah, I hope that's the case. I don't think it will be, but that's my hope. I think that about does it. We've gone about an hour. I'm gonna be doing a little editing, so but yeah, I think that about covers it. We did cover all of the Roster Mania stuff, the Carolina, London, Royal Ravens thing, the Guard, and now the CDL, possibly, maybe, who knows, being back on YouTube. But Make sure to subscribe, like, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thumbs up and share the videos on YouTube if you could. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. I'm not sure when the next show will be. Could be a week or two. Kind of depends on what happens in the next week or so, because we did cover quite a bit on this episode over the past, what happened the last 2 weeks. So who knows, but we will be back at most probably 2 weeks. But yeah, just don't count on us being back next week 100%. More like 50%. It either will or will not happen. But yeah, that does it for me. Bing, take it away.
I guess it'll depend on the result of the big battle on Monday Night Football between the Browns and Steelers, and who's feeling worse after that. Probably will be me. But
probably both of us, to be honest.
Anywho, I guess, yeah, that's a good reminder to, I guess congratulations is the right word, but, hope everybody enjoyed the first week of NFL being back. If you were watching, I know I'm definitely excited about that, and, it's good to have football back. But back on topic, yeah, thank you guys as always for tuning in and supporting. You will see us again whenever we go live, and the best way to find out when we're going live is follow us on Twitter and wait to see the tweet that says we're going live. So until whenever that fateful day is, thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.